Welcome back, Chiefs fans and Bills fans. This is a Locked On crossover episode for the divisional round, the Chiefs versus the Bills. Thank you for making Locked On Chiefs and Locked On Bills your first listen of the day. We really do appreciate that. And thank you to our title sponsor, Online Gambling. This podcast is brought to you by OnlineGambling.com, the place to be for all the latest gambling news and tips throughout the NFL playoffs. Visit OnlineGambling.com/NFL to get the edge over the competition throughout this year's playoffs. As you know, we've talked to him before, Joe Marino from Locked On Bills. Joe, how's it going, bud?
I'm doing good, Chris. It sounds like this is going to be a January tradition for you and I to sit down and talk about these teams. So
I really do think it is. Yeah. I think these teams are going to be playing in January for the foreseeable future. Probably the next 8 or 9 years would be my guess, at least.
Well, I think we'll all sign up for that. This is what you want, though. I mean, this is, I think, what most people would believe are the two best teams in the AFC. For the Bills' perspective, an opportunity to maybe avenge what happened last year when they went to Kansas City, and for Kansas City to continue proving that they're the class of the AFC and get to it would be a fourth straight AFC championship game if they were to win this game. So they want to stay on top of the conference. Should be a good one.
Yeah, and potentially hosting the third possible straight AFC championship game. So we'll see how that ends up. But, and this would be a chance for the Chiefs to avenge the game earlier this year, week 5, which Buffalo won. So a lot to talk about, but let's just dive in really quick. Talking about last week's games, from your perspective, what do you think you really can pull from last week's game watching the Bills play the Patriots?
I think the biggest thing is just confidence in the offense. Josh Allen obviously had a historic game, more touchdown passes than incompletions, nearly a perfect passer rating. The Bills didn't punt, 7 possessions, 7 touchdowns. I don't think that'll be the case again against Kansas City. However, what you can really glean from that is the confidence that team played with offensively against a good Patriots defense. And so I think that's what you want. I think you want to see your offense humming and playing together when it matters most. And that's kind of been the frustrating part of the season for Buffalo is they statistically a very, very good offense. And they had a lot of really dominant performances, but it felt like there was a lot of meat left on the bone. And I'm sure listeners of Locked On Bills are really tired of me using that phrase, but there were instances, it felt like in just about every game where I could point to different sequences where it's like, man, if you would have been a little bit more in tune with your plan, or you didn't have a boneheaded penalty, or you didn't have a drop pass, you would have had a lot more points. And you obviously couldn't say that against the New England Patriots. And so they played well. And I feel like if there's anything, they have a lot of momentum going into this football game. And obviously they're a hungry team that is well aware of what happened to them last year in the playoffs.
Yeah, and I am looking forward to this matchup because I think it's going to be a lot like the AFC Championship game from last year. And I'm not necessarily talking about the score. I'm just talking about it's going to be a good competitive game, which I think that game was for the most part. But I look at what Kansas City did this last week. Patrick Mahomes goes and throws for 5 touchdown passes. They end up throwing 6 with Travis Kelce getting a touchdown pass late as well. They score 40 points as well. So, I mean, you're sitting here in a situation where you have 2 offenses that are playing very well. I think the Bills have changed their offense a little bit from week 5. Kansas City's offense has picked up from where they were in week 5 and, in the earlier part of the season. So I do think that this is going to be a fantastic game with 2 offenses that are really hitting its stride at the same time.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, I would say when it comes to the Bills, and we'll obviously get a lot more specific in the coming segments, defensively, they've been really good all season long. And I think that's going to be a really fun storyline in this football game where we all know what this Chiefs offense is capable of. If I'm not mistaken, number 1 in plays per drive, yards per drive, and points per drive. They're good on offense. They're probably the best in the NFL. All right, well, now you have the number 1 defense that is statistically far and away the best defense in the NFL. And so how that plays out is always fascinating. And we've seen it go both ways. And, it's just going to be an exciting football game. I think if you don't have a rooting interest, you're probably really excited about this one. But you have 2 teams that are suddenly very familiar with one another. There's obviously the Sean McDermott, Andy Reid storylines, 2 of the most dynamic young quarterbacks in the league, and Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes. everything's on the line. There is no tomorrow.
There's no tomorrow, and the winner of this game is going to go on to play in the AFC Championship game, possibly host the AFC Championship game, depending on how the other game shakes out. And I do think that that's really going to be the case, that the winner of this game is going to host. I will just throw that out there right now. A little bit of a spoiler alert, I guess. I do think the Bengals are going to beat the Titans, but we'll see if end up being right on that. But you're absolutely right. The Bills have had a fantastic defense all season. Kansas City's defense, however, has been one of the lowest scoring defenses in the league since, I think, week 11. They are just allowing, 14 points, 16 points, or somewhere in 14 to 16 points per game. And some of the games where they allowed a lot of points, they were missing 3 or 4 of their starters, dealt with COVID. It is what it is. We will see how that ends up. But when we get back, Joe's going to ask me questions about this Chiefs team. But before we go there, I want to tell you about onlinegambling.com. Chiefs fans and Bills fans, we are all looking for an edge these days and would like to thank our sponsor, onlinegambling.com, for sponsoring today's podcast. If you don't know already, onlinegambling.com is a website dedicated to giving bettors the edge. Throughout the playoffs, they're providing you with the best NFL tips, news, and more to help you make your bets as informed as ever. This week, the experts at onlinegambling.com set me the challenge of picking my divisional round upset, an underdog that, in my opinion, could pull off a huge victory. And I've already said that. I believe it's going to be the Cincinnati Bengals. I think they're going to beat the Tennessee Titans. If you're thinking about backing an underdog in the divisional rounds, make sure you go to onlinegambling.com before you do. Onlinegambling.com gives bettors the edge by providing the best and most trusted information to help you make the best decision possible before placing a bet. That includes their OG tips section, where you see their own underdog picks, as well as the inside track on how to beat the odds throughout the NFL playoffs. Make sure you visit onlinegambling.com/NFL for all the latest gambling news, tips, and info to beat the odds and give you the edge throughout the playoffs. Remember, onlinegambling.com/NFL to make the most of this year's playoffs.
Joe Marino of Locked On Bills, joined by Chris Clark, the host of Locked On Chiefs. And it's my turn to ask him some questions about the Kansas City Chiefs and his perspective on Sunday's game. And so I want to start with this Chiefs offense. And I feel like it's evolved a lot throughout the course of the season. And one thing that I said on Locked On Bills yesterday as I started to preview this game was, these aren't the same two teams that played in week 5. There's an entire season that has went down, and the teams have evolved, and there's different dynamics. And so what I want to get from you is how this Chiefs offense is different today than it was maybe back in week 5, and how you've seen it evolve throughout the course of the season. You know, there was that big storyline about the 2 high safeties and what the Chiefs were going to do to get teams out of that. And it really feels like they've dialed into the quick passing game and the screen game, but I'll get out of the way and let you tell us exactly what's been going down with this Chiefs offense.
I do think that Mahomes has struggled at times this year, and I think you saw that in the middle of the season and early on in the season when teams are playing a lot of 2 high. He really wanted to go deep. He wanted to take the deep shots. He wanted to go for the throat. That's what he wants to do as a passer, and I get it. But he's to the point now where he's starting to realize that if he checks downs and he takes the underneath throws and the screens and the flat passes, that the offense can move and will be just fine. So I think that's really where they're focusing. And I think the other thing that you're really seeing right now is an offensive line that in week 5 was playing okay, but they're playing much better right now. I will say they're missing Lucas Niang. He's going to be out this game. He's on IR, not going to be playing. It's going to be Andrew Wiley. But Orlando Brown was still getting acclimated to this offense. I think he's a lot further along in that acclimation period. I don't think he's quite to where you'd want him to be, but he's still a lot better. And then you look at the trio of guys inside who are just playing absolutely fantastic football and keeping Mahomes from getting interior pressure, and that is a huge key to this offense's success.
Now, it feels like they're getting more players involved. I was kind of surprised when I was looking over their target distribution for like the last 6 weeks. There really hasn't been a whole lot separating the likes of Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill, Byron Pringle, and Mecole Hardman. And of course, they get the ball to the running backs as well. And so am I right in that Mahomes is definitely doing a better job of using the entire arsenal of weapons that he has at his disposal?
Yeah, I think you are. And I think the other part of it that you're seeing now is Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill were Mahomes' weapons that he would like to strike down the field with. Mecole Hardman as well. He would want to strike down the field with Mecole Hardman. Byron Pringle as well at times, in that same scenario. But now he's taking the things that the defense is going to give him. If they're going to play too high and they're going to give him the underneath stuff, he's going to hit Travis Kelce underneath. He's going to hit Byron Pringle or McCole Hardman or maybe Demarcus Robinson or any of the running backs that are playing as well. He's going to hit them underneath, and that's going to be who he's going to be going to. He's not looking to take the deep shot and hit everything downfield. Now, don't get me wrong. He wants to take deep shots, and if he sees them wide open, he will take them. But he's not looking to take it down the field every time he gets on the field, and I think that's a huge thing. When you start looking at what Byron Pringle's brought on this year, and then you see also guys like Demarcus Robinson who've had a few catches, not a lot, but a few. And then you have other wide receivers that are kind of stepping into different roles. Josh Gordon has played a little bit, but he didn't play last week. And they're trying to bring Noah Gray around. And Blake Bell as well. And then you have the running backs out of the backfield. So I do think that they're moving the ball around and they're using their weapons in space correctly. Because if you look at what they've been doing with McCole Hardman lately, it's getting them the ball in space. It's wide receiver screens, or it's a quick out or something, or a slant where he can just catch the ball, turn on a dime, and get up the field as quick as he possibly can.
You mentioned the deep shots for Patrick Mahomes. They're not quite as frequent as we are used to seeing from Patrick Mahomes, but the efficiency is just as good as it's ever been. 143 passer rating on shots 10 or 20 yards or more down the field. I was really impressed with how he's played and how he's kind of found that balance. I think he's really done a good job of finding that patience, but also doing the things that make him so dynamic as an all-around quarterback. Chris, a tradition like no other. It's the Chiefs defense. It starts off with some struggles, but somewhere around the middle of the season, things turn around and they're playing a lot better of late. So this time around, what's contributed to the Chiefs defense really playing a lot better over the last half of the season?
First things first, I will say Melvin Ingram is, I think, one of the biggest reasons that they're playing so much better. And it's not necessarily because he's getting a lot of sacks, because he's not, but he is creating pressure. But it's that he allowed Chris Jones to kick back inside. And when you have a guy that can play defensive end and he can stop the run at the defensive end position, and he can create pressure from his defensive end position as well, that's very big for this defense. And then you look at Chris Jones inside, where he is an absolute monster. He is breaking up the interior of offensive lines and creating havoc for QBs. I think that's one of the big things. When you look back at playing the Bills the first time around, Chris Jones didn't play. Charvarius Ward didn't play. Daniel Sorensen was starting, so he was a starter at safety. Willie Gay was on IR, I believe, or just coming back from IR. And so basically Sorensen is now on the bench, and he played a horrible game against the Bills the last time around. But it's now Juan Thornhill there, and Melvin Ingram is now starting. So you're in a situation where you have basically 5 new defensive starters that weren't there this last Bills game, but it's all of those guys combining and coming together as a defensive unit, getting on the same page, getting things figured out. It's Nick Bolton getting better throughout the season, and Bolton has actually outsnapped Anthony Hitchens and Willie Gay over the past couple of games. So he's become a very big cog in their defense.
So when you laser in on this matchup on Sunday night, what's your number one key for the Chiefs on offense against the Bills defense? Your number one key for the Chiefs defense against the Bills offense? What's that prevailing thought in your mind that has to be true in order for them to win this game?
As crazy as it sounds, I think one of the things that really hurt Kansas City early in the season was quarterbacks running on them. So I'm really going to be watching Willie Gay. I think that they're going to spy Josh Allen. It may not be every single passing play, but I think it's going to be a lot. And it's also going to be stopping the run. The Bills offense, at least from what I've seen, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but from what I have seen, they've started running the ball more. It's not that they're running the ball, 50% of the time, but they're running the ball more and they're running it effectively. So when you get into a position where you can use your linebackers, you can stop the run, that's very big. And it's very big if you can stop Josh Allen from running the ball on his QB draws, or even when he's just scrambling. So I think that's something to watch on defense that I think could be a real X factor in this game. Then you flip it over to the offensive side of the ball. To me, this is a game where you have to get the other people involved. Byron Pringle has to have a good game. You have to get the running backs involved, whether it's Jerick McKinnon or Clyde Edwards-Helaire or Darrell Williams. Whoever it is at running back has to have a big game for Kansas City. Obviously, you're going to have Travis Kelce, you're going to have Tyreek Hill, but Demarcus Robinson having a good having a good game, and maybe one other guy just being able to create something and making the Bills have to cover every single person, I think is huge.
Now, Chris, the last thing I have for you is about X factors. And I think we all know the prominent storylines with this football game. But what are some of the X factors that come to mind for you from the Kansas City side of things that maybe we're not talking about enough when considering this matchup on Sunday night?
I think the biggest X factor is, we talk about offenses all the time when we talk about these two teams. And you talked about the Buffalo defense, and we kind of talked about the Chiefs defense a lot as well. But I think that's really one of the X factors going into this game is, Buffalo scored almost 40 points on Kansas City the first time around this year. We'll see whether or not that is the way that this game is going to play out. I think that one of the biggest X factors is how are those 5 new defensive starters that they didn't have the last time around going to play this game? Because if they show up and they're able to do what they've been doing the past several weeks, they only allowed 14 points against the Steelers. Yes, they scored 21, but one of them was a defensive fumble. And I know the Steelers aren't a great offense, but in that game, they held the Steelers to basically nothing in the first half. And it was when they started going to prevent. And that's not really going to happen against this Bills team, I don't think. I don't think they'll be doing prevent. I think that that's going to be something that is not going to happen this week. So I think the defense is going to be an X factor in this game. I think that guys like Tyrann Mathieu and maybe even Anthony Hitchens. And then you have guys, in the middle like Chris Jones, who can really be an X factor and really create problems on the defensive line for Kansas City.
People think unusual circumstances mean complicated taxes, but for TurboTax Live experts, that's what makes things interesting. Maybe you inherited a condo and are renting it out, or maybe you're getting paid in crypto and you're not sure how it's taxed. For TurboTax Live experts, an interesting life can mean an even greater refund. Luckily, TurboTax Live can match you with the right expert who has experience in your unique situation and can answer all of your tax questions right from your phone or computer. They even take care of the entire filing process for you. Whether you launch your own startup or are working multiple jobs and juggling multiple incomes, an experienced TurboTax Live expert can help you during the entire filing process or do your taxes for you from start to finish to get the deductions that you deserve. Visit TurboTax.com to learn more. You do your thing. They've got your taxes. Intuit TurboTax Live.
All right, Joe, let's go ahead and jump into this because there's a lot that I want to ask you about this Buffalo Bills team. I'm really looking forward to this matchup. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. My first question, though, one of the things we talked about, the Chiefs have a lot of changes on defense. Are there any big changes in the way the Bills have been playing lately from how they played early in the season?
You mean defensively or
both offensive and defensively?
Yeah, offensively, we'll start there. I think you kind of teased this. The Bills have found a bit of a running game with Devin Singletary. They had been this committee approach where Zach Moss was getting half the work and Devin Singletary was getting the other half. This is now the Devin Singletary show, which is a major shift in philosophy from what we've seen from the Bills, not just this year, but under Brian Daboll and Sean McDermott dating back to 2018 when those two guys got together to be part of this coaching staff. McDermott was 17, but Daboll came in 18. It's been a two-back thing. No, Devin Singletary is the lead back. He's the bell cow for, it's still an offense that wants to throw the ball primarily, but he's their primary ball carrier, and I think that's allowed him to get into some rhythm. The other thing might seem minor, but Ryan Bates has stepped into this lineup at left guard, and he's really stabilized that position. And the Bills have had a lot of different injuries on the offensive line. Josh Allen's one of the quarterbacks in the NFL in terms of playing behind the least common offensive line. I think only around 20% of the snaps he's played this year were behind his most common players up front. And they've really found something here with Ryan Bates, and this offensive line has stabilized in a lot of ways. And they've also shifted to a gap run scheme as opposed to a zone run scheme. So offensively, those are the three fundamental big differences. Defensively, this team doesn't have Trey White anymore as its number one corner. He's got a torn ACL. He won't be available for this game. And I think this is the one game where the Bills are probably going to really feel not having him with all the great receivers that the Chiefs have. And they've certainly played well with Dane Jackson as the starting cornerback opposite of Levi Wallace. I mean, statistically, not close, the best defense in the NFL. I mean, they only allow 3.8 adjusted net yards per pass play against their defense. That would be the number 2 run defense in the NFL. They're great at stopping the pass, but this is a different animal here with the Kansas City Chiefs. So I say all that to say that they don't have Trey White anymore at corner, but they will have Matt Milano at linebacker for this game. When that was a game that he missed week 5 against Kansas City when those teams hooked up earlier. The other thing that I'll say is Harrison Phillips has really emerged at defensive tackle to play alongside Ed Oliver, and they're working well in concert with each other. But I'd say mostly it's more of the same from this Bills defense with no Trey White. And in comparison to last time they played, you get Matt Milano back at linebacker. And I think the defensive line has stabilized even more with a guy like Harrison Phillips coming into his own in his 4th season in the NFL.
Well, I can guarantee you the Chiefs fans can really understand where you're coming from when it comes to not having an offensive line that can play together the entire season. Not this year, but last year that was a big issue for Kansas City. And I will say I've loved what I've seen from Devin Singletary. I do think that that's going to be a lot of fun to watch going into this game. In the games that the Bills lost outside of the win game with New England, because that's just a crappy game to talk about.
Yeah.
Are there commonalities that have taken place that have led to their losses?
Well, they've all been 1-score losses. I mean, well, the Colts game was the Bills' big stinker this year. All right, they got destroyed in that football game, but the other 5 games that they lost were all 1-score games, and I think in 4 of those 5, the Bills had a chance at the end with the ball in their hands to win it, and they just couldn't get it done. I think it was like a combined 23 points. I mean, just some really disappointing losses, and so I think that's what it came down to is in all of those games that the Bills lost, all 5 of them. They were 1 play away from winning the game. Now they didn't make the play, and so it counts, right? Like you don't just say, well, if you would have made 1 more play, you didn't, so you take the L. But it felt like
the game that sticks out to me. Sorry, Jacksonville. The Jacksonville game just really sticks out as a weird one. 9-6.
Yeah, it's one of those games where it was an extremely weird game. Jacksonville was the more energetic team, I would say. They played with a lot more enthusiasm. They got the Bills into some personal fouls early in the game, and it felt like the Bills were just out of their rhythm for that one. So, I mean, it's funny how many times I have to, like, that game is so far removed, and the team is so far different from what we saw in that game. But it even my neighbor is like, hey, the Bills are doing good. What happened against Jacksonville? I'm like, I don't know, man. It was like 10 weeks ago. This is not the same football team, so I'm not sure it's a really relevant one to bring up. It's certainly a black eye on the resume, and it makes the Bills look bad, right? But I just, that's not the same football team that we've seen amid this 5-game win streak. It's not the same football team we saw against New England Patriots, and so yeah, it's just it's a week-to-week league. You know that humility in the NFL is 1 week away. Those things happen. It's a disappointing loss, but it's so far in the rearview mirror right now that it's somewhat odd that we're talking about it.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. Hard to see that Jacksonville score and understand it. But who are 2 of the underrated players or under the radar players, one on offense and one on defense, that Chiefs fans should watch for making big impacts in this game?
Well, on defense, I think it goes to Taron Johnson, their slot corner. They recently signed him to a contract extension, and I thought he played really well the first time around these 2 teams met. And so I think he's the type of guy that maybe, everybody knows the safeties and, all the talent they have in the front 7, a lot of high picks there. But Taron Johnson's been this really outstanding slot corner out of, picked in the 4th round several years ago out of Weber State. And he's done such a good job. And the Bills really rely on him as a base nickel defense. So I think he's the guy on defense to keep in mind. And I feel like offensively we can go so many different directions, but I'll go with Gabriel Davis. We talk about Stephon Diggs, Emmanuel Sanders, Cole Beasley, Dawson Knox. We've already talked about Devin Singletary. Gabriel Davis is that X factor. He's that guy with the size and the ball skills in this Bills weaponry, and he's got a unique skill set, and they get him going with the glance routes in the RPO game, and Josh will look for him when he's working off script to take some chances down the field. And so he's the type of guy that can, not necessarily going to command a high volume of targets, but he can make 3 or 4 plays every game that really are impactful in terms of getting bad situations and really using that RPO game to the Bills, maximum opportunities.
Yeah, I'm really kind of surprised you didn't say Isaiah McKenzie. I was figuring you were going to go there, but no, Gabriel Davis is shown up this year as well. I've seen that. If we look at the past games with these teams over the past couple of seasons, Hill and Kelsey have combined for an average of almost 11 catches on 17 targets for 102 yards and about 2 touchdowns per game in the regular season. When they played in the playoffs last year, they combined for 22 catches on 26 targets for 290 yards and 2 touchdowns. How can Buffalo's defense make sure they don't have a repeat of last year's AFC Championship game against Hill and Kelsey?
Well, I mean, you're talking about 2 of the premier playmakers in the NFL. I mean, those guys, there's no do these 3 things and they don't make any plays. They're exceptional football players that are tough to stop with, an elite quarterback throwing them the ball. So, yeah, if you got any ideas, send an email to Sean McDermott. He'd like to hear it. But I think what this really comes down to is, with Patrick Mahomes, you can't blitz this guy. He's going to kill you if you blitz him. That's been the story on him year after year. This year is no different. So you have to be able to get organic pressure. You have to be able to rush 4 and get home. And so that's step 1. You have to be effective with your 4-man rush. And number 2 is you have to be disciplined with your coverage spacing. You got to drop 7 and really try to flood the passing lanes with bodies to try to take away some throws. And where that gets really difficult with a guy like Patrick Mahomes. And I think when you go back to the AFC Championship game where this really got the Bills in trouble is they had bad eye discipline. They weren't trusting their coverage landmarks. They were moving off their landmarks, and they were falling victim to Patrick Mahomes manipulating the defense with his eyes or, his movement within the pocket. And the Bills would get out of their landmarks, vacate space that they're supposed to be in. And then all of a sudden there's Travis Kelce right behind it. Quick pass. And this guy eats up yards after catch. And so I think it's 4-man rush and it's disciplined coverage spacing. And, it's no easy assignment. I think the NFL in general has kind of had their palms to the air, right, when it comes to stopping this Chiefs offense. So, I don't have an easy answer, but I think those are probably your 2 most important principles to give yourself a chance of stopping, or not stopping, slowing down and minimizing the impact of 2 of the premier playmakers in the NFL.
And I'm glad you bring up blitzing. I think it's kind of funny. I think I saw a stat earlier today, something like the Bills have blitzed Patrick Mahomes 8 times in like 150 snaps.
Yeah. 0 times, 60-something dropbacks in week 5. They didn't blitz him a single time.
Right. Yeah.
So
you don't do it. It doesn't work out for you. Yeah. And teams have figured that out. So it's a lot of fun to watch. Joe, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Really have enjoyed this episode. I'm really looking forward to this game. I think it's going to be a phenomenal game. I'm glad it's the Sunday night game. I think that's going to be something that's going to be fun to watch. And we're going to know if one of these teams is going to be hosting the AFC Championship game by the time this game kicks off.
Well, Chris, we're basically division rivals at this point. We'll have 2 games next year, I'm sure. So that'll be it for this year. But, I'm looking forward to watching this game. And then, of course, all the matchups that are going to come between the Bills and Chiefs in the future.
All right, well, that is going to be it for us today. Thank you so much for listening to Locked On Chiefs and Locked On Bills. I am Chris Clark. He is Joe Marino. Be sure to go check out the Locked On Bills podcast this week. Go get your information from Joe. He does a fantastic job. Thank you, and we will talk to you all tomorrow.